You think you know who's running WWE and who's making the decisions that affect your favorite wrestlers? You think Triple H is really in charge of everything that happens on SmackDown and that the general managers actually have power over what goes down in their shows? Well, CM Punk just absolutely destroyed that illusion and exposed something so disturbing about what happened to him at Survivor Series that it's going to make you question every single thing WWE has told you about how their company operates and who's really pulling the strings behind the scenes. Punk went completely off script during a backstage segment that was supposed to be a simple interview and instead delivered one of the most scathing and controversial call-outs in recent WWE history, directly blaming both Nick Aldis, the SmackDown general manager, and Triple H, the chief content officer, for not protecting him from the vicious attack that cost him his match at Survivor Series and potentially derailed his entire career trajectory. Before you start saying that Punk is just being his usual difficult self or that he's working everyone with another elaborate storyline, you need to hear exactly what he said and understand the context of why this is so much more serious than just another wrestling promo. If you click away right now, you're going to miss the most important wrestling controversy of the week, a situation that has WWE management scrambling to control the narrative and that has the entire locker room taking sides about whether Punk is justified in his accusations or whether he's gone too far in publicly calling out his bosses. By the time I finish breaking down every detail of what Punk said and what it reveals about the dysfunction in politics happening behind the scenes in WWE, you're either going to be standing with Punk demanding accountability from WWE leadership, or you're going to think he's being unprofessional and entitled, and either way you're going to have strong opinions that you need to share in the comments section right now. And make sure you hit that subscribe button immediately because we're the only channel that's going to give you the real unfiltered truth about what's happening in this situation, not the sanitized corporate-approved version that WWE wants you to believe, but the actual story with all the uncomfortable details that other outlets are too scared to report. The segment that started this entire controversy happened during a backstage interview on SmackDown this week that was supposed to be CM Punk addressing his loss at Survivor Series and discussing what's next for his character going forward. These kinds of interviews are standard programming fare in WWE, usually featuring a wrestler giving their perspective on recent events while staying within the boundaries of whatever storyline creative has mapped out for them. The interviewer asks some setup questions, the wrestler delivers their practiced responses hitting all the key talking points that creative wants emphasized, and the segment accomplishes its purpose of advancing storylines without creating any real controversy or problems. That's what everyone expected from this Punk interview, a straightforward few minutes of television that would set up his next feud or explain his motivations without rocking the boat or creating waves. But from the moment CM Punk started talking, it was clear that something was different about this interview and that he wasn't planning to stick to whatever script had been prepared for him. His tone was angry and confrontational right from the start, his body language aggressive and unfiltered in ways that immediately signaled this wasn't going to be a typical controlled corporate promo. When the interviewer tried to ask him about moving forward and looking ahead to future opportunities, Punk completely ignored the question and instead went into a blistering attack on WWE management that left everyone watching absolutely stunned. He specifically called out Nick Aldis by name, questioning why the SmackDown general manager, who's supposed to be responsible for maintaining order on the brand and protecting the wrestlers under his jurisdiction, did absolutely nothing to prevent the attack that cost Punk his Survivor Series match. Punk's exact words were something along the lines of, "Where was Nick Aldis when I was getting ambushed backstage at Survivor Series? Where was the general manager who's supposed to be running SmackDown and making sure that attacks like that don't happen to his top stars?" The venom in Punk's voice when he said Aldis's name made it clear this wasn't just kayfabe anger for the cameras, this felt real and personal in ways that made everyone watching extremely uncomfortable. Punk didn't stop there though. He escalated even further by bringing Triple H into it and questioning why the person who's supposed to be in charge of all WWE creative content and who's supposed to have final say over everything that happens on television allowed this attack to occur without any consequences for the people who perpetrated it. The implications of what Punk was saying went far beyond just complaining about losing a match or being upset about a storyline direction. By calling out both Aldis and Triple H publicly and questioning their competence and their commitment to protecting talent, Punk was essentially accusing WWE management of either incompetence or deliberate sabotage. He was suggesting that the attack at Survivor Series either happened because management failed to properly secure the backstage area and prevent unauthorized interference, or worse, that management knew it was going to happen and allowed it anyway because they wanted Punk to lose or wanted to teach him some kind of lesson. Either explanation reflects terribly on WWE leadership and creates serious questions about whether wrestlers can trust that management has their backs and will protect them from situations that could injure them or damage their careers. The attack at Survivor Series that Punk was referencing happened during a crucial moment in his match when he had the advantage and seemed poised to pick up a significant victory that would have elevated his position on the SmackDown roster. A masked figure appeared from the crowd or from backstage, the exact details are disputed depending on which version of events you believe, and attacked Punk with such vicious intensity that he was left unable to continue competing effectively. His opponent capitalized on Punk's vulnerable state to pin him and take the win, and in the immediate aftermath there was tremendous speculation about who the masked attacker was and what their motivations might have been. WWE presented it on television as a shocking mystery angle that would be investigated and eventually resolved with the attacker's identity being revealed and appropriate punishment being administered. But according to Punk's version of events in this explosive interview, WWE management has done absolutely nothing to investigate the attack or to hold anyone accountable for what happened. He claimed that despite his repeated requests for meetings with both Nick Aldis and Triple H to discuss the incident and demand action, he's been ignored or given vague non-committal responses that make it clear nobody in power actually cares about getting justice for what happened to him. Punk portrayed himself as a wrestler who's being failed by the very people who are supposed to be looking out for his interests and ensuring that the show operates fairly and safely, painting a picture of WWE management as either incompetent bureaucrats who can't maintain order or as corrupt authority figures who are deliberately allowing chaos because it serves some agenda they have. The reaction from the live crowd in the arena during this interview was fascinating because you could hear the energy shifting as Punk continued talking and as people realized this was something more than just a regular wrestling promo. There were cheers from fans who love when wrestlers break the fourth wall and acknowledge backstage politics, who appreciate Punk's willingness to speak uncomfortable truths that other wrestlers won't say publicly. But there were also murmurs of confusion and uncertainty from people who weren't sure if this was part of a storyline or if Punk was legitimately going into business for himself and creating real problems with management. The interviewer holding the microphone looked visibly uncomfortable throughout the segment, clearly not knowing whether to try to redirect the conversation back to safer territory or whether to just let Punk continue his rant and hope that someone in the production truck would cut away before things got worse. WWE's immediate response to what Punk said, or more accurately their complete lack of immediate response, tells you everything you need to know about how seriously they're taking this situation and how much damage control they're trying to do behind the scenes. If this was a worked angle that creative had approved and that everyone was in on, you would expect WWE to immediately start building off it on social media and in their official communications, framing it as part of an exciting storyline about Punk versus authority or Punk seeking justice. But instead there's been radio silence from WWE's official channels, no statements from Triple H or Nick Aldis addressing Punk's accusations, no follow-up segments scheduled to continue this angle in obvious ways. That silence suggests WWE is treating this as a real problem that needs to be carefully managed rather than as compelling television that they want to promote and build around. The wrestling media's coverage of this situation has been predictably cautious, with most major outlets reporting on what Punk said but being very careful not to speculate too much about whether it was a work or a shoot or some combination of both. These outlets have relationships with WWE that they need to maintain, and they can't afford to be too aggressive in their coverage if it means losing access or being frozen out from interviews and backstage information. So instead of really digging into what this means and what the backstage tensions might be, most coverage has been fairly surface-level recapping of what Punk said, followed by non-committal analysis that doesn't take strong positions about who's right or wrong in this situation. But anyone who's been following CM Punk's entire career knows that this is exactly the kind of situation he thrives in and exactly the kind of controversy he's created multiple times before at various points in his journey through professional wrestling. Punk has never been someone who quietly accepts perceived injustices or who goes along with the program when he feels he's being mistreated or disrespected. His entire reputation is built on being the voice of the voiceless, the person willing to say what everyone else is thinking but too scared to articulate, the wrestler who will burn bridges and create chaos if that's what it takes to stand up for himself and for what he believes is right. The infamous pipe bomb promo that made Punk a legend happened because he was frustrated with his position in WWE and decided to air those grievances publicly in the most dramatic way possible. Consequences be damned. So the question isn't really whether Punk is capable of going off script and publicly calling out his bosses. We know absolutely that he is. The question is whether what he said during this interview represents his genuine feelings about how he's been treated, or whether it's part of a more elaborate work storyline that WWE has created to generate controversy and attention. And honestly, the answer is probably somewhere in between those two extremes, with elements of real frustration and real tension being channeled into a storyline framework that allows everyone to benefit from the drama and attention while maintaining plausible deniability about what's real and what's scripted. The specific accusations Punk made against Nick Aldis are particularly interesting because Aldis is a relatively new authority figure in WWE who's still establishing his character and his on-screen presence as SmackDown general manager. Aldis doesn't have years of history with fans the way someone like Triple H does. He's not automatically associated with being a corrupt or incompetent authority figure the way some managers have been portrayed over the years. So having Punk target him specifically and question his ability to do his job effectively could be WWE's way of building heel heat for Aldis, establishing him as someone who's either unable or unwilling to maintain order on his brand. That would set up future storylines where Aldis has to prove himself or where other wrestlers start questioning his authority, creating ongoing drama that keeps the general manager character relevant and involved in major angles. The accusations against Triple H are on a completely different level though, because Triple H is a real executive with actual power over creative decisions, not just a kayfabe authority figure who exists only on television. Criticizing Triple H is criticizing the person who literally decides whether CM Punk gets pushed or buried, whether he gets interesting storylines or gets stuck in meaningless mid-card feuds, whether he's positioned as a top star or gradually phased out of prominent roles. The fact that Punk was willing to call out Triple H by name suggests either that this is a sanctioned angle that Triple H himself approved, or that Punk has reached a point where he genuinely doesn't care about burning that bridge because he feels his treatment has been so unfair that speaking out is worth whatever consequences might follow. The historical relationship between CM Punk and Triple H adds multiple layers of context to this situation that make it even more complicated and potentially explosive. These two have never been particularly close or aligned in their visions for what WWE should be and how wrestling should be presented. During Punk's first run with WWE, there were well-documented tensions between him and Triple H over creative direction and over Punk's position on the card. Punk felt that Triple H and the other executives in charge at the time didn't properly value him or give him the opportunities his talent deserved, while Triple H and management viewed Punk as difficult and as someone who didn't fit the mold of what a WWE top star should look like and act like. Those tensions contributed to Punk eventually leaving WWE on bad terms and spending years away from the company before his eventual return. When Punk did return to WWE, there was hope that the relationship between him and Triple H had matured and evolved, that both men were older and more professional and could work together productively despite their past differences. Triple H as the new person in charge of creative was supposed to represent a fresh start and a different approach than what existed under Vince McMahon's leadership, and Punk's return was seen as evidence that Triple H was willing to work with people who had previously been considered difficult or problematic. But if there are still underlying tensions and if Punk genuinely feels that Triple H has failed to protect him or support him properly, then all those old wounds and all those past conflicts could be resurfacing in ways that threaten to destroy their working relationship all over again. The locker room reaction to Punk calling out management publicly has been mixed, with wrestlers taking different positions based on their own experiences and their own relationships with WWE leadership. Some wrestlers are reportedly supporting Punk's decision to speak out, viewing it as brave and necessary, believing that someone needed to publicly question why attacks and interference are allowed to happen without consequences and why management doesn't do more to maintain order and protect talent. These wrestlers may have their own frustrations with how they've been treated or with creative decisions that have affected them negatively, and they see Punk as a proxy fighting battles that benefit everyone in the locker room by demanding more accountability and better treatment from those in power. Other wrestlers are reportedly critical of how Punk handled the situation, believing that airing grievances publicly rather than dealing with them through proper channels is unprofessional and creates unnecessary drama that makes everyone's job harder. These wrestlers worry that Punk's actions could lead to management becoming more defensive and less willing to listen to legitimate concerns from talent if they feel like anything they say or do might be weaponized and used against them in public promos. There's also concern that if this becomes a pattern where wrestlers regularly call out management on television, it undermines the authority structure that WWE needs to function and makes it harder to maintain order and discipline within the roster. The fans' perspective on this controversy is predictably divided along lines that reflect broader attitudes about CM Punk as a performer and as a personality. Punk's most devoted fans absolutely love this and see it as classic Punk behavior, the rebellious outsider speaking truth to power and refusing to be silenced or controlled by corporate interests. These fans have been conditioned over years to view Punk as the hero fighting against an unjust system, and they automatically side with him in any conflict with management regardless of the specific circumstances or who might actually be at fault. They want to see Punk continue pushing boundaries and creating controversy because that's what makes him compelling and different from other wrestlers who play it safe and never rock the boat. Punk's critics and detractors see this as more evidence that he's a difficult personality who creates unnecessary drama wherever he goes and who can't help himself from burning bridges and making enemies even when it's not in his best interest. These fans point to Punk's history of conflicts in multiple wrestling companies, his pattern of leaving organizations on bad terms after publicly criticizing their management, and his reputation for being hard to work with as evidence that maybe the problem isn't always WWE or the bookers or his opponents but is actually Punk himself and his inability to function within normal professional structures. They view this latest call-out as selfish attention-seeking behavior that serves Punk's ego but doesn't actually accomplish anything productive. The potential consequences for CM Punk if WWE management decides they've had enough of his behavior and his public criticisms are significant and could range from subtle creative punishment to outright termination depending on how serious they view this breach of protocol. WWE has ways of making life difficult for wrestlers who displease management without necessarily doing anything that's overtly punitive or that could be clearly pointed to as retaliation. They can gradually reduce a wrestler's television time, putting them in less prominent positions on cards and giving them fewer opportunities to showcase their abilities. They can book them in storylines that don't play to their strengths or that make them look weak or foolish, damaging their credibility with fans. They can exclude them from major premium live events and important moments that would help build their star power and their value. Or in more extreme cases, WWE could simply decide that working with CM Punk isn't worth the headaches and the drama that comes with him, and they could release him from his contract or choose not to renew it when it expires. This would be a nuclear option that WWE probably doesn't want to pursue given Punk's star power and his ability to draw attention and generate interest, but it's not completely off the table if relationships deteriorate to the point where keeping Punk around creates more problems than benefits. And given Punk's history of walking away from companies when he feels disrespected, there's always the possibility that he might quit before WWE has a chance to fire him, recreating the same pattern that's defined much of his career. The strategic question of what WWE should do in response to Punk's call-out is genuinely difficult because there's no obvious right answer that makes everyone happy and solves all the problems. If they ignore it completely and pretend it never happened, that looks weak and suggests that Punk was right in his criticisms and that management has no good response. It also encourages other wrestlers to try similar tactics if they feel they've been treated unfairly, knowing that they can air grievances publicly without facing consequences. But if WWE comes down hard on Punk with public criticism or punishment, that risks creating a martyr situation where Punk becomes even more sympathetic to fans who view him as being persecuted for speaking truth. The most likely scenario is that WWE tries to incorporate this controversy into a storyline in a way that benefits everyone involved and turns negative attention into compelling television. They could position Nick Aldis as a general manager who's now under pressure to prove himself and maintain order, leading to him taking a harder line with wrestlers who create chaos or who question his authority. They could set up a program where Triple H has to address Punk's accusations on camera, either defending WWE's handling of the Survivor Series attack or acknowledging that mistakes were made and promising to do better going forward. They could reveal the identity of Punk's attacker and build a feud around Punk seeking revenge while also dealing with the political complications of challenging management's authority. The comparison to other famous moments in wrestling history where wrestlers have publicly called out real management figures is inevitable, with people pointing to various work shoots and reality-based angles that have blurred the lines between what's part of the show and what's genuine backstage conflict. The most obvious parallel is to Punk's own pipe bomb promo from years ago, which remains one of the most talked about moments in modern WWE history precisely because of how it mixed real frustrations with storyline drama in ways that kept fans guessing about what was real. Other examples include various periods where wrestlers have broken the fourth wall to comment on backstage politics, with varying degrees of success depending on how well the angle was executed and whether it led to satisfying payoffs. What makes this current situation with Punk calling out Aldis and Triple H potentially more significant than those past examples is the timing and the context of where WWE is right now as a company. WWE is trying to establish itself as a more professional and more mature organization after years of criticism about its workplace culture and its treatment of talent. They're dealing with increased scrutiny from media and from sponsors and from investors who care about corporate governance and employee relations. They're competing with AEW and other promotions for talent and for fan attention, and part of their pitch to wrestlers about why they should choose WWE is that it's a stable professional environment with competent leadership that makes good creative decisions. Having one of their top stars publicly questioning management's competence and suggesting that leadership failed to protect him from an attack undermines all of those messages and raises questions about whether WWE has actually changed as much as they claim. It gives ammunition to critics who argue that WWE still operates the same way it always has, with politics and favoritism and poor treatment of talent being the norm rather than the exception. Even if this is all a work storyline, the fact that it feels plausible and that fans can believe Punk might genuinely have these grievances says something about WWE's reputation and about the perception of how they treat their wrestlers. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel and have your notifications turned on because this story is developing rapidly and we're going to be tracking every new detail as it emerges over the coming days and weeks. Whether this turns into a compelling long-term storyline or whether it becomes a legitimate backstage crisis that threatens CM Punk's future with WWE, it's going to be one of the most important wrestling stories of the year and you're going to want to stay informed with accurate information and insightful analysis. We're committed to giving you the real story without the corporate spin or the fear of losing access that prevents other outlets from being completely honest about what's happening. CM Punk calling out Nick Aldis and Triple H for failing to protect him at Survivor Series is either the beginning of an incredible angle or the beginning of the end of his WWE return, and either way it's going to be must-watch television for anyone who cares about wrestling and about how the business operates behind the scenes.